Hello and welcome. It was a major turnaround. 2 years after America's 16 intelligence agencies claimed that Iran was, quote, determined to develop nuclear weapons, the same agencies held the view last week that Tehran had halted its weapons program 4 years ago. Speculation had grown that the Bush administration might take matters into its own hands and bomb Iran, if not to wipe out Tehran's nuclear ambitions, then at least to set them back a decade or so. The speculation was fueled by President George Bush's statement that an Iranian bomb could contribute to World War III. Vice President Dick Cheney also warned that there would be, quote, serious consequences if Iran did not suspend uranium enrichment. So, what changes now for the advocates of a hard line against Tehran? Will we see more emphasis on dialogue and diplomacy, or more tough talk about sanctions and consequences? Don't forget, we take your calls on the show. You can reach us at the numbers there at the bottom of your screen. Joining me is Dr. Michael Ledeen, a foreign policy expert at the Conservative American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. Dr. Ledeen was one of the advocates of the Iraq War and has argued for limited strikes on Iran. He is the author of The Iranian Time Bomb, the Mullah Zealot's Quest for Destruction. Dr. Ledeen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Let me start with an article you wrote for the Wall Street Journal a few months ago. You said that at the time, the negotiations between Washington and Tehran would be useless. To quote you, Washington diplomats have steadfastly refused to see the Iranian regime for what it is, a relentless enemy that seeks to dominate or destroy us. Now, of course, we find out that Iran has stopped its quest for nuclear weapons, and that happened in 2003.
Well, wait a minute.
Has that changed your view in any way?
But Iran, the issue was never nuclear weapons, and I wasn't talking about a nuclear program when I wrote those words. What I was talking about was nearly 30 years of uninterrupted Iranian attacks against Americans all over the place, and they continue today. I've always felt that the nuclear issue was a kind of distraction from the central point, which is that Iran declared war on the United States in 1979 at the time of the revolution, and they have been conducting it ever since, and we have never really responded to it. And so when earlier you said that I was in favor of limited attacks against Iran, what I'm in favor of is permitting our troops to defend themselves, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, against attacks that are coming from people that are being trained inside Iran. I am opposed, and have always been opposed to bombing Iran, invading Iran, or anything like that.
So, would it be the best route for the United States right now to open talks with Tehran?
Yeah, but it won't get you anyplace. For nearly 30 years, the United States has been talking to Iran. It's not as if it hasn't happened. A lot of people act as if, let's do something new, let's talk to them. Just a little over a year ago, Condoleezza Rice sent Felipe González, the former Prime Minister of Spain, a very serious person, to Tehran, where he talked to Larijani to explore the possibility of some kind of rapprochement or modus vivendi between the United States and Iran. And Larijani sent him away. And in fact, that's exactly the same response that Felipe González had received a few years before during the Clinton administration when they sent him to Tehran to try the same thing.
But situations change, circumstances change, the environment has changed.
Talk to them, it's fine with me. I mean, I'm not opposed to talking to them. I just think it's foolish to expect that anything will happen, anything different will happen now than it has over the past 30 years. I mean, 30 years is quite a long time. And somebody, I used to think it was Einstein, but one of my readers corrected me on it and said it was somebody else. Anyway, the definition of a crazy person is somebody who keeps doing the same thing over and over again, hoping somehow to get a different outcome. So we've been talking, we've tried talking, and it hasn't worked. You want to keep talking, by all means.
Let me ask you this. There's a Washington analyst, Steve Clements from the New America Foundation, who had this to say about you. He says that you have an obsession with Iran and that you once told him that you supported the Iraq War because it would preposition American troops for an attack on Iran. Is that right?
No, it's an invention. I never said any such thing, nor would I say any such thing. I was very reluctant about Iraq. If you look at what I wrote before the Iraq War, you will find that I said that was the wrong war in the wrong place at the wrong time, that Iran was the principal enemy and the main supporter of terrorism in the Middle East, and that if you wanted to wage war against terror, then Iran was the place to start. And the way to deal with Iran was not by invading it, but by supporting the Iranian people who are overwhelmingly opposed to the regime. That's been my position always. Once the Bush administration made the decision to go into Iraq, I supported it, but I didn't think it was the smart thing to do.
You know, in the weeks and indeed months running up to the publication of that national intelligence estimate last week, there were many who were calling for more sanctions against Tehran, and there was some support even coming from China. Does the publication of that NIE report now undercut those calls for sanctions?
Well, I don't know. It seems it has for the Chinese. It seems it hasn't for the British, the French, the Germans, and the Israelis. But in any case, sanctions have never, in my experience, sanctions have never changed the policy of an enemy country. Sanctions have only worked against friendly countries that felt stigmatized by the sanctions. Even though, as a matter of policy, I do think some of the recent smart sanctions are a very good idea because they target terrorist groups like the Revolutionary Guards and so forth and their bank accounts, and some of the leaders of the regime who have bank accounts around the world. But I think general sanctions are a bad idea.
You know, you talk about a war that Iran declared against the United States 30 years ago, but yet in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks in 2001, Iran was one of the close allies of the United States that was part of that coalition that went into Afghanistan and stabilized that country. So how do you justify that?
Well, at the same time that the Iranians were giving verbal support to the coalition forces in Afghanistan and giving us, I'm told, intelligence about Taliban in Afghanistan, they were also organizing assassination teams and terrorist groups inside Afghanistan to come after American forces. So they were at a minimum doing both things, but they're quite capable of doing both things.
Let's get a call in from one of our viewers. This is from Khalifa in Cairo. Go ahead with your call.
Yes, thank you. I would like to talk to Mr. Leiden. You know, I think what he's saying is there's a problem. I don't think he's telling the truth. You see, I think what he's saying is the United States has been trying to have a dialogue with Iran for the last 30 years. It's true, but always with preconditions, very tough preconditions. Any independent country will refuse those conditions without any doubt. Number two, when he talks that Iran has always been committed, to aggressions against the United States, it's a very strange. The United States who came to the Middle East and attacked many countries. It's not the Iran who went. Iran never declared war on any country in the Middle East. It's Iraq who attacked, Kuwait. It's the United States who attacked Iraq, and it's Israel who was attacking Lebanon and Syria and still occupying those countries. I don't know where he got all these information as he's testing them.
Khalifa, what is your question, Khalifa?
My question is this. Why he is not telling the truth? Why he's not talking with facts? I mean, this is really, I don't know where he got all these information and he's insisting on that.
Okay, let's give Dr. Leiden a chance to respond.
Well, it's not really a question, it's an accusation that I'm a liar. What do you want me to say? Iran did declare war on the United States. When the Ayatollah Khomeini declared the United States to be the great Satan, what does that mean? When tens of thousands of Iranians are dragged into the streets every week and made to chant death to America, what does that mean? Is that, what, Walt Disney? Is that part of the great Zionist plot? Give me a break.
What about the question on Israel?
What about the question on Israel?
Well, he was saying that it was Israel that attacked, that invaded Lebanon, that Israel was one of the causes of instability in the Middle East.
Listen, there's a long-standing war in the Middle East. There's lots of wars in the Middle East. I don't know anybody who's smart enough to be able to assign responsibility to one side or the other. Any Israeli you talk to will tell you that Hezbollah was attacking Israel across that border and it just seized Israeli hostages. Is that not an act of war, etc.? I mean, I'm not here to solve all the problems of the Middle East. I'm just trying to say Iran declared war on us in 1979. Iran has killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans between 1979 and today. They are continuing to arm and train and fund and organize terrorist groups in Afghanistan and Iraq today that kill Americans. And there's abundant testimony to this. And that's the central issue.
But your bottom line on this, from what you're saying, is by all means talk to Iran, but you don't believe it's going to get anywhere.
Right. And I do think that we have a moral obligation to support the Iranian people who wish to be free, who don't want to be governed by a fanatical regime. who wish to live at peace with their neighbors, who don't want to be supporting terrorist organizations, as far as anybody can tell. Right now, I mean, just the last couple of days, there have been big demonstrations at universities all over Iran against the regime, asking for a national referendum so that they can vote on the form of government that that country will have. And then once that's happened, to elect a government to staff it out. I'm for that. I'm not calling for military attack. On the other hand, all these people who constantly blame the United States for all of this, if they took an honest look at what I've written in the Iranian Time Bomb, which deals with American policy toward Iran for the last 30 years, they will find administrations that really bent over backwards, desperately trying to get some kind of modus vivendi with Iran. Look at what the Clinton administration did. Incredible. And yet the Iranians laughed in our faces.
Dr. Ladin, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Thank you. We're now going to turn to another prominent voice in the Iran debate. Hilary Mann Leverett was the director for Iran and Persian Gulf Affairs at the National Security Council up until 2004. She participated in the U.S. discussions with Iran from 2001 to 2003. She currently is the chairwoman of the consultancy group Stratega. Ms. Leverett, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Looking at the publication of that national intelligence estimate that I talked about earlier on, do you feel vindicated because you were saying those things a long time ago?
In part, there is some vindication. My hope is that perhaps it could inject some reality, some facts, a fact-based approach into our diplomacy. But I am not optimistic. I mean, I think just as you've seen with your last guest, with Michael Ladin, the rhetoric is now going to shift. There's now an attempt to shift the rhetoric that people who were so concerned about the nuclear issue really weren't all that concerned about the nuclear issue. They were really concerned about the terrorist activities of Iran. And we saw this, of course, with Iraq in the wake after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and there were no nuclear weapons to be found. People who supported that war came out afterwards and said, well, it wasn't really about the nuclear weapons, it was about the horrible behavior of Saddam Hussein. Now we see the rhetoric shifting on Iran as well, that it wasn't really the nuclear issue, it's the terrorism issue. And there, I think that my particular experience when I was at the White House and in the State Department, when I was officially authorized, one of just a couple of people in the U.S. government officially authorized to negotiate with the Iranians over Afghanistan and al-Qaeda, I think that my experience is particularly important to get out on this issue. On al-Qaeda, for example, one of the topics that was central to our talks with the Iranians, we repeatedly raised the problem of al-Qaeda operatives, fugitives, trying to flee Afghanistan in the wake of the U.S. bombardment of Afghanistan in 2001. There were literally thousands of al-Qaeda foot soldiers and higher operatives who tried to flee both from Afghanistan to Pakistan and to Iran. Most of them tried to flee to Iran to get to other countries where maybe they had been born, for example, or had family links. Most of them did not stop and try to seek refuge inside Iran. They used it as a transit point. Because of our request, when U.S. diplomats such as myself and the people who I was, the other U.S. officials I was negotiating with, for example, like Ambassador Ryan Crocker, who's now our ambassador in Baghdad, we asked repeatedly that the Iranians prevent al-Qaeda operatives from coming into Iran over the border from Afghanistan, and to arrest any that they could, detain them, and deport them. The Iranians, in fact, did that with hundreds of al-Qaeda operatives. There are many cases where the Iranians took concrete action to detain, arrest, and deport al-Qaeda operatives. By the end of our dialogue, in 2003, by the end of our dialogue with the official U.S. dialogue with the Iranians over Afghanistan and al-Qaeda, there were probably a handful of al-Qaeda operatives who were inside Iran, and we were trying to get the Iranians to get that last remaining handful to deport them. By that point, the Iranians had decided, for what their various reasons, that they could use those chips with us. They could use those last remaining handful of al-Qaeda operatives as chips with us to try to get us to extradite or deport MEK operatives. MEK is the long-standing group that the U.S. has designated as a terrorist organization. It's an anti-Iranian terrorist group based in Iraq. They thought that once we had invaded Iraq, that we could we could round up these MEK operatives and deport them to Iran, and there could be a trade.
Okay, Ms. Leverett, what I want to do is I want to get some questions in from our viewers. We have a viewer here calling from Dublin, Mary Joseph. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, it's good to listen to your program, and I only heard some of the last lady's comments, and I was really thinking about Michael's comments, but I'm glad to hear what's coming out now in the last few minutes. What do you expect the Iranians to do? I mean, it's America who is dropping bombs on Afghanistan and flattening Iraq, totally wrecking what is left of that country. They have divided the country. Of course Iran is going to use its chips. They have to protect themselves somehow. I am watching in horror as the Middle East is unfolding. And Israel is part of the American whatever it is in the Middle East. They do their bidding. And they have nuclear weapons.
What is your question, Mary?
Well, my question is, I think saying Iran doesn't talk to America, of course they do, but America doesn't talk directly to Iran since the Shah went. They send a Spanish person to talk to Iran instead of talking themselves. I think Iran has the right.
Okay, Mary, let me ask Ms. Leverett about that. I think one of the points the viewer was making there was that a nuclear weapon in Iran's hands would act as a deterrent against any attack from the United States. What do you make of that?
Yes, I mean, as an American, as someone who worked for the U.S. government, I am 100% loyal to the United States and to our policies. But I do understand that an Iranian government, particularly one that feels itself under siege or under threat from whether it's a real attack or perceived, would resort to what I call asymmetric warfare, what is termed asymmetric warfare. And I think that is why they are interested in a nuclear weapons option, not to actually have the weapon, but an option to be just like Japan, have the fuel cycle, and even to support various opposition or terrorist groups, because they see those as vital to regime survival, for the Iranian government to survive if we're under attack. I understand that.
Yeah, let me ask you this when we talk about an Iranian nuclear program. Right now, at present, is Iran breaking any international laws?
Well, not that we know of. What the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has said is that in the past, Iran was not transparent as it was supposed to be under its treaty obligations. So the IAEA has put together a work plan to work with the Iranian government to go back and look at what could have been past transgressions, past violations by the Iranians, to see if they can be resolved. If they can be resolved, then there would be no violation. But if there are continued questions and the Iranians are not do not satisfy the IAEA that they have come clean, in a sense, from what they've done, then
sorry,
they could be in violation.
We are going to have to end it there. Time's caught up with us. Hilary Mann Leverett, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
And thank you for being with us. Don't forget, if you have any thoughts about pressing issues around the world, send your emails to riz@aljazeera.net. See you next time. Street Talk is next.